So I want you to picture this. It is the spring of 1947.
Okay, setting the scene.
Right. And there's this young Bedouin shepherd, and he's just wandering around these craggy, sun-baked cliffs near the Dead Sea.
The northwestern shore, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And he's looking for a stray sheep, and, maybe out of frustration, or honestly, maybe he was just bored, he tosses a rock into this dark, narrow cave opening.
As you do when you're a bored teenager.
Right, exactly. But instead of just hearing that dull thud of stone hitting stone, he hears this distinct, really sharp sound.
A shattering sound.
Yes, shattering pottery. And what he finds inside that cave, it didn't just end up enriching a few antiquities museums.
Oh, no. It completely upended things.
It effectively threw a grenade into this, 200-year-old academic war over one single ancient document.
Because he had just stumbled upon the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Right. And sitting right there, just in the dust, was a massive 24-foot-long leather scroll.
Unbelievable.
The Book of Isaiah. Completely intact and dating all the way back to the 2nd century BC.
Which is, it is arguably one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in human history.
Easily.
Because, up until that exact moment, the oldest complete Hebrew manuscript we had of Isaiah was from around 1000 AD.
1000 AD. Wow.
Right. So that cave suddenly pushed our physical, tangible connection to this text back by over 1,000 years.
Just dropping us right into the middle of the Second Temple period.
Exactly. It's just incredible.
Well, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are immersing ourselves in a really massive, comprehensive, scholarly briefing on the Book of Isaiah.
That's a big one.
It really is. And our mission for you today is to take this sprawling, totally intimidating ancient text and basically decode exactly how it operates.
Right. We're going to look at how it functioned as this desperate survival guide during the just terrifying geopolitical crises of the 8th century BC.
And how it completely rewrote the rules of historical literature.
Yeah, and ultimately how it became the absolute source code for the New Testament.
I love that phrase, the source code. But to do this properly, our source briefing relies heavily on something called the Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia.
Often just called the BHS, thankfully.
Right, I saw that acronym all over the notes. But before we go any further, what exactly is the BHS? Why are we using that instead of just, a standard English translation off the shelf?
No, it's a great question. So the BHS is essentially the definitive, modern, scholarly edition of the Hebrew Old Testament.
Okay.
It's based on the Masoretic text, specifically the Leningrad Codex from the 11th century.
So it's like the foundational document.
Right, because when you read a standard English translation, you're actually reading the end result of, hundreds of interpretive decisions made by modern translators.
Right, they've already done the filtering for you.
Exactly. But the BHS gives us the raw data. The original Hebrew consonants, the later vowel pointings those medieval scribes added, and all these extensive footnotes about textual variants.
So it's the unvarnished truth.
Yeah, and if we want to understand the really intricate poetry, the devastating wordplay, and just the raw rhetorical force of Isaiah, we have to anchor ourselves in the actual Hebrew language.
Which means we are definitely going to get into the linguistic weeds today.
Oh, absolutely.
And I am here for it. But before we get to the poetry, we really have to establish the ground reality.
The historical context.
Right. Because we're introduced in the very first verse to Isaiah, son of Amos, or in the Hebrew, Yeshayahu ben Amos.
Yeshayahu, yes.
Who is this guy? Because I don't know about you, but my default image of a biblical prophet is usually like a guy out in the wilderness.
Right, wearing camel's hair and eating locusts.
Exactly, John the Baptist style.
Yeah, that's a really common misconception. It's heavily influenced by those later figures. But Isaiah, son of Amos, is almost the exact opposite of that archetype.
Really?
Yeah, he isn't some rural shepherd or a wilderness hermit. The internal evidence points really strongly to him being an aristocratic figure.
Oh, wow, so he's upper class.
Very much so. He's someone of high social standing with direct access to the royal court. He ministered right in the heart of Jerusalem.
Which was the political and religious epicenter of Judah.
Exactly. And his ministry wasn't just a brief stint. It was this grueling marathon spanning over 40 years.
40 years. That's a long time to be giving people bad news.
Roughly from 739 to 681 BC.
Uh-huh.
And the text explicitly tells us he was active during the reigns of 4 different Judean kings.
Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, right?
You got it. 4 kings.
That alone implies he witnessed a massive amount of political instability. I mean, regime changes, shifting alliances.
Oh, constant upheaval.
And the scholarly briefing uses this specific term to describe the context of his world. It's Sitz im Leben.
It's a limit, right? It's a German phrase.
Why do biblical scholars use this specific term instead of just saying, historical background?
Well, Sitz im Leben translates literally to setting in life.
Setting in life, okay.
Yeah. It's a foundational concept in form criticism, which is a branch of biblical studies that popped up in the early 20th century.
So it's more nuanced than just history.
Exactly. They use it because it implies something much deeper than just a timeline of dates and battles. It asks, well, what was the social, political, and cultural environment that made this specific type of literature necessary?
Like, what were the psychological pressures on the audience reading it?
Right. You really can't separate the words of Isaiah from the existential dread of the people he was actually speaking to.
Okay, so paint that picture for me. What exactly is the existential dread here? What is the Sitz im Leben of an 8th century Judean?
It is an era defined by just profound, earth-shattering terror.
Terror. Not just anxiety, but terror.
Total terror, because you have the aggressive expansion of the Neo-Assyrian Empire.
Okay.
Now, when we say empire today, we might think of, I don't know, economic influence, cultural hegemony.
Right, diplomatic pressure, trade deals.
Right. But the Neo-Assyrian war machine was something entirely different. They were expanding with a ruthless, calculated military efficiency that the ancient world had never seen before.
So they weren't just conquering, they were annihilating.
Oh, they perfected siege warfare. And they utilized psychological terror as a primary diplomatic tool.
What does that mean exactly?
I mean, flaying their enemies alive. Mass impalements.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and the systematic deportation of entire populations just to erase national identities.
So basically, they were the Borg.
That's a great analogy.
They show up, assimilate your resources, destroy your culture, and scatter your people so you literally can never rebel against them.
Precisely. They were swallowing up the surrounding nations one by one. In 722 BC, which is during Isaiah's lifetime, the Assyrians completely destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel.
The 10 northern tribes, just gone.
Wiped off the map entirely. And the southern kingdom of Judah, where Isaiah lives, they're just watching this unstoppable juggernaut inch closer and closer to their own borders.
So, into this atmosphere of total unmitigated panic, Isaiah steps up to the microphone.
He does.
But he doesn't just offer political commentary or like a standard God will protect us patriotic speech.
No, not at all.
He makes a staggering theological claim. The briefing points out that Isaiah identifies Assyria, this terrifying, flaying, mass-deporting superpower, as an instrument of divine judgment.
Yes.
He essentially says, you know that monster at our gates? Our God sent them.
Which is wild.
I mean, that has to be bordering on treason, right?
To his contemporaries, it would have sounded exactly like treason.
I'd imagine so.
Because the natural human instinct, and really the standard political theology of the ancient Near East, was that if an enemy army attacks you, it means their gods are stronger than your gods.
Right, it's a cosmic turf war.
Exactly. But Isaiah completely inverts this. He tells his own people that the enemy burning down their neighbors and marching toward Jerusalem is actually just a tool in the hand of Yahweh.
Wow.
It is this radical, unprecedented assertion of God's absolute sovereignty over human history.
And as if that wasn't enough to make him totally unpopular at dinner parties, the text shows Isaiah looking even further down the timeline.
Right, he doesn't just stop at Assyria.
Exactly. The briefing highlights his early prophetic targeting of Babylon. Now, at this point in history, Babylon isn't the primary global superpower, right? Assyria is.
Correct. Babylon is a player, but not the big threat yet.
But Isaiah points to Babylon as the ultimate future archetype of human pride and rebellion.
And this early focus on Babylon is exactly where we hit the most massive scholarly battleground surrounding this entire book.
This brings us to the famous unity of Isaiah debate.
Yes, the authorship debate.
I found this part of the notes fascinating, because if you were just sitting in a pew reading this or reading it as a straight narrative, you might not notice the tectonic plates shifting beneath your feet.
Most people don't.
But when you look closely, there is a massive fracture in the text. Let's walk through this. So the first 39 chapters are intensely focused on this 8th century Assyrian crisis.
Right. Assyria is a threat. Hezekiah is a king. Isaiah ben Amoz is physically walking the streets of Jerusalem.
But then you turn the page to chapter 40.
And the entire universe changes.
It is such a dramatic, jarring pivot. When you open chapter 40, the Assyrian crisis has just completely vanished.
Like it never happened.
The geopolitical landscape has shifted by a century and a half,
Yeah, the focus is now entirely on the Babylonian exile.
which is an event that happened long after the historical Isaiah died.
Exactly. The temple in Jerusalem has been destroyed, the people have been conquered, deported, and they are living as captives in Babylon.
And the tone shifts drastically too, right? From
Mhm.
impending doom to this message of profound comfort for a devastated community.
Right. Comfort my people, it says.
It's like reading a detailed present tense history of the Cold War.
Mhm.
You're reading about the Berlin Wall, the Cuban Missile Crisis, JFK. And then suddenly, the very next chapter is a detailed present tense account of the year 2150. You're reading about off-world colonies and futuristic alliances as if the author is standing right there.
That's a perfect way to put it.
So the obvious question for any historian or textual critic is, wait, is this an example of supernatural foresight by a single author, or are we looking at a multi-generational anthology stitched together over centuries?
And that exact question catalyzed the critical view of Isaiah's authorship.
When did this critical view really start gaining traction?
It gained massive momentum in the late 18th and 19th centuries during the Enlightenment.
Hmm.
Scholars, famously championed by a guy named Bernhard Duhm in 1892.
D-U-H-M.
Yes, they looked at this historical jump and applied strict historical critical methods. They argued, look, a man living in the 700s BC did not write a highly specific comfort manual tailored for exiles living in the 500s BC.
Because according to that critical framework, prophecy is more about, speaking truth to power in your current historical moment.
Exactly. Not gazing into a crystal ball to describe political regimes that literally don't exist yet.
Okay, so how did Dumm and the critical scholars resolve this?
They fragmented the book. They coined the term Proto-Isaiah for chapters 1 through 39, attributing the core of those chapters to the historical Isaiah of Jerusalem.
Okay, that's the first guy.
Then they identified Deutero-Isaiah, or Second Isaiah, for chapters 40 through 55,
And they say this was written by who?
by an anonymous prophet living among the exiles in Babylon.
Got it.
And they even proposed a Trito-Isaiah, Third Isaiah, for chapters 56 through 66.
Written by a third author.
Or a group, after the exiles returned to a ruined Jerusalem. They observed massive shifts, not just in historical setting, but in the Hebrew vocabulary, the literary style, the theological focus.
So for these critical scholars, the book of Isaiah isn't a single book by a single guy. It's more of a school of thought.
Exactly. A rolling tradition that later editors compiled and harmonized over centuries.
Okay, so we're making sure we impartially report on this. That is the critical perspective, a multi-author compilation.
Right.
But the briefing also extensively outlines the traditional conservative view, which pushes back hard against this fragmentation.
Mhm.
What is the engine driving their argument for a unified text?
Well, the traditionalist view is anchored in several major pillars. Fundamentally, it rests on a theological conviction regarding the very nature of predictive prophecy.
Which means?
From a conservative standpoint, if you operate within the worldview that the text itself presents, the Spirit of God is fully capable of granting a prophet supernatural insight into the distant future.
So they argue God actually inspired Isaiah to speak to his immediate 8th century crisis, but also to project a specific word of hope into the future exile.
Exactly.
But if I can push back on that for a second, on behalf of the listener, the critical scholars would say, sure, maybe God could do that, but why would he? Why give an 8th century audience a highly detailed message about a Babylonian exile that won't happen for another 150 years? Wouldn't that just be totally irrelevant to them?
It's a fair question, and traditionalists answer it by pointing to the core rhetorical argument of chapters 40 through 48.
Okay, what's happening in those chapters?
The primary polemic, the central argument God is making against the idols of Babylon in those chapters, is precisely his unique ability to announce the future long before it happens.
Ah, I see.
The text actively taunts the pagan gods. It says, "Declare to us the things to come. Tell us what is to come hereafter, that we may know that you are gods."
So God is flexing his predictive power.
Exactly. The entire theological weight of those chapters relies on the premise that Yahweh declared these events generations in advance.
So if a 6th century author is just writing about contemporary events and retroactively pretending it was predicted in the 8th century,
Then the traditionalist argues that the entire theological argument of the book just collapses into a pious fraud.
that makes a lot of sense regarding the internal logic of the text. If the text says God's defining characteristic is predicting the future, A retroactive edit totally undermines that premise.
Exactly.
But it's not just a philosophical debate, right? The notes mentioned there is tangible textual evidence that traditionalists bring to the table, too.
Oh, absolutely. There is deep thematic continuity that binds all the sections together. For instance, there's this highly specific title, The Holy One of Israel.
I saw that in the briefing.
Yeah, it appears 12 times in the first half of the book and 14 times in the second half.
Okay.
But it is rarely used anywhere else in the entire Old Testament. It acts as this unique theological fingerprint right across the whole document.
That's a compelling point.
And furthermore, the traditional view leans heavily on how later biblical writers engaged with the text.
You mean the New Testament writers?
Exactly. When writers like Matthew, Mark, or John quote from the later chapters, the supposed Deutero or Trito-Isaiah sections, they explicitly attribute those quotes to Isaiah the prophet.
They don't say the anonymous prophet of the exile.
Right. They treat the book as a unified whole. And then, of course, we come back to that cave in Qumran in 1947.
The Great Isaiah Scroll. How did that discovery impact this specific debate?
Well, the Great Isaiah Scroll proved that by the 2nd century BC, the community that copied and preserved this text viewed it as a single, indivisible work.
There was no gap.
None. The transition between chapter 39 and chapter 40 happens on the very same column of leather. There is no break, no editorial seam, no notation indicating a change in authorship.
So the ancient readers understood it as one unified architectural structure.
They absolutely did.
So if you were reading this text today, why does this 200-year-old academic debate actually matter to you?
Right, why care?
Well, because it fundamentally changes the lens through which you view the book's claims about reality.
Exactly.
If it's a multi-author compilation, it is a brilliant, evolving theological reflection on national trauma.
Yeah.
It's humans trying to make sense of suffering after the fact.
Right.
But if the traditional view holds, and it's a unified book with predictive prophecy, then it presents a terrifyingly sovereign God who is not reacting to history but actively managing it.
Announcing the end from the beginning. It dictates whether you read the text as retroactive historical commentary or as a testament to unyielding divine sovereignty.
Okay, so regardless of where someone lands on the exact timeline of compilation, the final canonical text we have sitting in front of us begins with a literary strategy that is completely arresting.
It really is.
Because if you were tasked with writing a survival guide for a nation facing an existential military crisis, you'd probably start with words of comfort, right?
Sure. Hang in there, pray for deliverance, something like that.
Exactly. Isaiah doesn't do that. He kicks the door down and immediately files a lawsuit.
It is a breathtaking opening sequence. Chapters 1 through 5 constitute the first major strategic movement of the book.
And it bypasses any polite introductions.
Totally plunges the reader straight into a rib. Yes. That is the Hebrew term for a formal legal dispute, a covenant lawsuit, a cosmic courtroom drama.
A cosmic courtroom drama. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Set this scene for us. If this is a trial, who is the judge, who is the defendant, and who is sitting in the jury box?
Okay, so Yahweh, the God of Israel, operates simultaneously as the injured party, the prosecuting attorney, and the ultimate judge.
Talk about a stacked court. And the defendants.
The defendants are the nation of Judah, his covenant people.
And the jury.
God summons the very fabric of creation, Isaiah 1.2. Hear, O heavens, and listen, O earth, for the Lord has spoken.
Wow.
He literally calls the sky and the ground to bear witness to the rebellion of his people.
You don't subpoena the cosmos unless the stakes are absolute.
Exactly.
But what I find fascinating is the specific nature of the indictment. Because if you just looked at the surface of Judean society at that time, they looked like a deeply religious, devoted people.
Oh, very observant.
They're attending the temple, they're slaughtering the sacrifices, they're observing the holy calendar.
And that is precisely what makes Isaiah's prosecution so devastating. He isn't attacking them for abandoning their religion. He is attacking them for weaponizing it.
Weaponizing it,
He systematically strips away the veneer of their religious superficiality. The indictment is that their worship is a hollow, hypocritical sham.
It's all performance.
Right. In chapter 1, God essentially says, "What to me is the multitude of your sacrifices? I have had enough of burnt offerings. I cannot endure solemn assemblies with iniquity."
I cannot endure solemn assemblies with iniquity. That has to be one of the most chilling lines in ancient literature.
That's terrifying.
God is effectively saying, your worship services disgust me. And why? because they are pairing this rigorous cultic ritual with systemic social exploitation.
Yes.
The text explicitly says, "Your hands are full of blood." They are raising their hands in the sanctuary to pray, and God looks down and sees the blood of the vulnerable dripping from their fingers.
The core of the prosecution's argument here is that Judah has fundamentally divorced their vertical relationship with God from their horizontal relationship with their neighbors.
They've completely separated the two.
Exactly. They are rigorously defending the rituals of the Torah, but entirely neglecting the weightier matters of justice. They are ignoring the orphan. They are failing to plead for the widow. They are accepting bribes.
So Isaiah is establishing a profound theological principle here.
Yes, that religious ritual, when it's divorced from social justice and ethical righteousness, doesn't pacify God. It actually provokes his judgment.
And this legal brief culminates in chapter 5 with an absolute literary masterpiece. The notes call it the Song of the Vineyard.
Oh, this is brilliant.
And it highlights Isaiah's use of paranomasia. We have to dig into the Hebrew here because the English translation just doesn't capture the gut punch of what Isaiah is doing. What is paranomasia?
Paranomasia is a really sophisticated rhetorical device. It's a play on words that sound incredibly similar, but have vastly different, often contrasting meanings.
Like a pun, but serious.
Basically, yeah. So in chapter 5, Isaiah acts like a minstrel, singing this seemingly innocent, folksy parable about a man who plants a vineyard on a fertile hill.
Sounds nice.
Right. And he does everything right. He clears the stones, he plants the choicest vines, builds a watchtower, carves out a wine vat. He has every right to expect a harvest of good, sweet grapes.
But
when the harvest comes, the vineyard yields wild, sour, rotting, worthless grapes.
And then the trap springs shut.
Exactly. The minstrel suddenly drops the disguise and reveals that the owner of the vineyard is Yahweh, and the vineyard itself is the house of Israel.
Wow.
God did everything necessary for them to flourish, but they produce rot. And this is where the paranomasia hits with devastating auditory force in the Hebrew text.
Okay, lay the Hebrew on us.
Isaiah says that God looked for justice, and the Hebrew word is mishpat.
Mishpat.
Right. But behold, bloodshed, which is mishpat.
Mishpat.
Wow. Then he says he looked for righteousness, tzedakah.
Okay.
But behold, a cry of distress, tzedakah.
Mishpat, mispah, tzedakah, tzedakah. I mean, it's almost a tongue twister.
It is.
The words are phonetic twins, but they are moral opposites. It's an auditory trap.
Exactly.
You hear the setup, you expect a beautiful, harmonious rhyme to resolve the poem, and instead you get this dissonant, horrifying phonetic twist. It's basically a fatal pun.
It is linguistic genius. The phonetic distortion brilliantly mirrors their moral distortion. They look like a vineyard, they sound like a vineyard, but the fruit is poisoned.
Okay, so the prosecution rests. The jury of heaven and earth has seen the evidence. The bloody hands, the sour grapes. It is an airtight case.
Yes.
And it is only now, after 5 grueling chapters of legal indictment, that we finally reach chapter 6. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up.
The famous throne room vision.
But I have a structural question here. This is his call narrative, right? This is where he gets his commission from God.
Right.
If you look at other prophetic books like Jeremiah or Ezekiel, they put their call narratives in chapter 1. They establish their credentials immediately. God called me, here is my badge, listen to my words.
Right, front and center.
So why does Isaiah wait until chapter 6?
Scholars refer to this structural decision as a strategic delay.
Strategic delay.
Yes. To understand why Isaiah employs it, you have to look at the terrifying nature of the commission he actually receives in that throne room.
What does God tell him to do?
Well, God doesn't just tell Isaiah to go and preach a happy message of repentance so that people can be saved. He gives Isaiah a commission of judicial hardening.
Judicial hardening.
God says, go and say to this people, keep on hearing, but do not understand. Keep on seeing, but do not perceive. Make the heart of this people dull and their ears heavy and blind their eyes.
Wait, God is telling the prophet to intentionally make the people less receptive? He is preaching to ensure their destruction.
Yes. It is a terrifying concept. It's a divine judgment of obduracy. Because they have persistently chosen rebellion, God is now confirming them in their rebellion so that the necessary judgment can fall upon the land.
Oh, wow. And that is why the strategic delay is necessary. I see it now.
You see the shift.
Yeah, because if I open a book and on page 1, God says, I'm going to harden these people's hearts so they can't repent, and then I'm going to let the Assyrians burn their cities down, my immediate reaction as a reader is outrage.
Right, you'd think God is the bad guy.
I'd say, that's unjust. God is a tyrant.
Precisely. The reader would immediately recoil and sympathize with the nation of Judah.
But because Isaiah forced us to sit through 5 chapters of the cosmic courtroom first.
Because he meticulously laid out the overwhelming evidence of their hypocrisy, their exploitation of the vulnerable, their bloodshed.
By the time we reach the harsh judgment of chapter 6, our reaction is completely different.
The reader understands that the judgment is completely, undeniably warranted.
The delay forces the reader to agree with the verdict before the sentence is handed down.
Exactly. It's masterful psychological pacing.
It really is. But the briefing also notes something crucial about how Isaiah builds this legal case. Because he isn't just inventing a prosecution out of thin air. He's relying on a very specific historical precedent.
Right. The intertextual integration.
Exactly. How does Isaiah legally justify hauling the nation into court?
He justifies it by pulling out the original contract.
Let's go back to that opening invocation in Isaiah 1.2. Hear, O heavens, and listen, O earth.
Right. That is not just a majestic poetic flourish. To a Judean audience, that exact phrasing would have triggered an immediate visceral recognition.
Really?
Yeah, it is a direct, intentional literary echo of Deuteronomy 32.1, the Song of Moses.
Oh, okay. Let me look that up. Deuteronomy 32.1 says, "Give ear, O heavens, and I will speak, and let the earth hear the words of my mouth." Wow, it's almost identical.
Yes, and the context of Deuteronomy is critical. Centuries earlier, before the Israelites entered the Promised Land, Moses led them in renewing their covenant with Yahweh.
Okay.
And in the ancient Near East, these types of agreements were patterned after suzerain vassal treaties.
Suzerain vassal, that's a sovereign king and a lesser nation.
Exactly. Formal binding contracts between a great sovereign king, the suzerain, and a lesser subordinate nation, the vassal.
And these treaties always had specific structural elements, right? Historical prologues, stipulations, and crucially, a list of blessings and curses.
Right. If you obey my laws, I will protect you and bless your land. If you rebel and follow other gods, I will bring famine, plague, and foreign armies to destroy you.
Sounds pretty straightforward.
It was. And standard protocol for ancient Near Eastern treaties required invoking witnesses to oversee the contract. Since Yahweh is the supreme God, he couldn't call on lesser gods as witnesses.
Because there are none.
Exactly. Instead, Moses called upon the enduring elements of creation, the heavens and the earth, to witness the signing of the treaty.
So, by echoing Moses, Isaiah is taking on the role of a covenant enforcement officer.
Yes, that's exactly what he's doing.
He's pulling the centuries-old contract out of the archives, pointing to the signatures and saying, look, you agreed to these terms.
He is telling them that the terrifying geopolitical crisis they are facing, the Assyrian armies massing on their borders, is not a political miscalculation. It is not just bad luck.
It is the direct legal execution of the covenant curses they agreed to at Mount Sinai.
Exactly.
That brings up a really fascinating dynamic regarding how Isaiah engages with the surrounding culture. Because he's looking backward to Moses, but he is simultaneously waging an ideological war against the superpowers of his own day.
Right.
The notes emphasize how Isaiah subverts ancient Near Eastern myths. To fully grasp his theology, we have to contrast it with what the rest of the ancient world believed about how the universe actually functioned. What was the standard theological operating system of those Mesopotamian empires?
Well, to understand the Mesopotamian mindset, you really have to look at their creation myths, like the Enuma Elish.
The Babylonian epic.
Right. Yes. In their worldview, the gods were essentially just amplified immortal humans. They were terrifying, yes, but they were also bound by the chaotic forces of the universe.
They weren't totally in control.
No. They lied, they schemed, they got drunk, they seduced one another, and they engaged in brutal cosmic warfare just to establish dominance.
So they were basically characters in an ultra-violent cosmic reality TV show.
That is a perfect description.
They were constantly forming alliances, backstabbing each other, trying to manipulate the balance of power. If the god of Babylon defeated the god of another city, it was usually because he found a better weapon or utilized a clever trick.
Right. Their power was entirely limited and contingent. Their wills could only be realized through exertion, conflict, and often deceit.
Okay, so how does Isaiah contrast with that?
Isaiah's presentation of Yahweh is a radical, aggressive subversion of that entire worldview. Isaiah's God faces no contingencies. He faces no cosmic resistance.
He doesn't have to scheme.
No, and he certainly doesn't negotiate with other deities. Isaiah portrays Yahweh as the transcendent sovereign who simply speaks and reality conforms to his word.
His purposes cannot be frustrated by human empires or foreign gods.
Exactly.
So going back to the reality TV analogy, Isaiah is arguing that Yahweh isn't a contestant scrambling for immunity. He is the sole director holding the definitive script. Nobody is voting him off the island. He created the island.
I love that. And that absolute unrivaled control over history is the only reason Isaiah can make the audacious claim we discussed earlier, that God is wielding Assyria and Babylon as mere tools.
Right.
In Isaiah chapter 10, God literally refers to the Assyrian Empire as the rod of my anger.
The rod of my anger. Wow.
To a Judean citizen, Assyria is a world-devouring monster. To Yahweh, Assyria is just a stick he picks up to discipline his children.
It's just a stick.
And when he's done using it, he will snap it in half and throw it into the fire.
The scale of that sovereignty is almost incomprehensible. God isn't reacting to the crises of the 8th century, he's orchestrating them.
He's the author.
But this raises a massive theological problem, which brings us to the next section of the briefing. Covenantal and biblical theology.
The big paradox.
Exactly. If God is this sovereign, and if he is as perfectly just as the cosmic courtroom implies, why doesn't he just wipe Judah off the map entirely?
Right.
They broke the contract, the jury found them guilty, they're full of blood, why let anyone survive?
That tension is the central theological heartbeat of the entire book. And it is perfectly encapsulated in Isaiah's favorite distinctive title for God, Kadosh Yisrael, the Holy One of Israel.
The briefing notes that this title bridges two concepts that seem completely contradictory: radical transcendence and intense historical immanence.
Yes.
Break those terms down for us. What do they actually mean here?
So transcendence refers to God being wholly other. He is infinite, completely set apart from the corruption and limitations of creation. He is a consuming fire of absolute moral purity.
Okay, that is the Holy One aspect of the title.
Right. Immanence, on the other hand, means he is close, intensely involved, and intimately engaged in the messy realities of human history.
And that is the soul of Israel aspect.
Exactly.
So the paradox is that the infinite, morally perfect sovereign of the universe has inexplicably hitched his reputation, his very name, to a broken, corrupt, hypocritical nation.
Yes.
He is the Holy One of Israel.
And that creates an explosive dynamic. I mean, how can perfect divine holiness, which demands the absolute eradication of sin, coexist with divine covenant faithfulness, which promised that Israel would be a blessing to the nations?
Right. How does a holy God not simply vaporize an unholy people?
Isaiah addresses this tension through the theology of the remnant.
The remnant. In the Hebrew, that's shir jashub, right? Meaning a remnant will return.
Yes.
This is how God balances justice and mercy. Because he is faithful, he will not entirely destroy his people, but because he is holy, he must discipline them.
Right.
The briefing uses a very specific word to describe this judgment. It says it is metallurgical.
Yes, the metallurgical metaphor is absolutely vital for understanding Isaiah's concept of judgment. In Isaiah 1.25, God says, "I will turn my hand against you and will smelt away your dross as with lye and remove all your alloy."
Okay, so think about the process of refining silver. You don't throw the silver into the fire to destroy it, right?
No, you put it in a crucible and turn up the heat.
So that the impurities, the dross melt and float to the top where they can be skimmed off?
That completely reframes the concept of divine judgment, doesn't it?
Totally. When we hear judgment, we immediately think of a penal sentence, an execution, the end of the line.
But the text is arguing that for the covenant people, the terrifying fires of the Assyrian and Babylonian invasions are not punitive annihilation.
Yeah.
They're a metallurgical purification process.
It's a crucible designed to burn away the corruption.
It is a refining fire meant to preserve a purified, holy core. However, we really cannot sanitize the brutal reality of this process.
It wasn't pretty.
No, the imagery Isaiah uses to describe this surviving remnant is stark and terrifying. He emphasizes that only a microscopic fraction will survive the fire.
He compares the survivors to a solitary hut left standing in a harvested melon field, right? Or just 2 or 3 olives clinging to the highest branch of a tree after it has been beaten.
It's a very small amount.
Yeah.
And the most famous arboreal image he uses is in chapter 6, verse 13. After God pronounces the judgment of hardening, he says the nation will be decimated, chopped down like a massive oak or a terebinth tree.
All that will be left is a ruined stump in the ground.
But that stump is the hinge upon which the entire message of hope swings. The verse concludes, "The holy seed is its stump." In Hebrew, Zerah Kodesh.
Zerah Kodesh.
The massive proud tree of the Davidic monarchy and the Judean state is going to be violently felled by the axes of foreign empires. But the stump isn't dead.
It contains the genetic blueprint.
The holy seed, yes. The blueprint for future restoration. New life is guaranteed to sprout from that purified remnant.
Which perfectly transitions us into the final major exploration of the text, the Christological focus.
Right.
Because what exactly grows out of that dead stump? Isaiah makes it abundantly clear that this tiny, purified remnant isn't just going to be a surviving group of traumatized Israelites trying to rebuild a city.
No, it falls down.
Right. The remnant funnels down into a specific singular life that alters the trajectory of human history. The briefing calls Isaiah the source code for the New Testament. How foundational is Isaiah to the Christian understanding of Jesus?
It is impossible to overstate. I mean, if you remove Isaiah from the Old Testament, the New Testament writers essentially lose their vocabulary.
Really?
The briefing identifies Isaiah as the preeminent source of messianic expectation.
Yeah.
He doesn't just offer vague hopes. He provides the detailed architectural blueprints for Christology, the theological study of Christ.
Okay, let's walk through what the notes call the 4 pillars of messianic prophecy in Isaiah, because the way they build on each other is staggering.
Yes, let's look at them.
The first pillar emerges right in the middle of the Assyrian crisis we talked about earlier, Isaiah 7.14.
Yes, the Immanuel prophecy. To understand it, you have to remember the Sitzim Liban again.
Okay, set the scene.
King Ahaz of Judah is terrified because a coalition of northern kings is threatening to invade Jerusalem. Ahaz is actually considering a disastrous political alliance with Assyria to save himself.
Making a deal with the devil.
Exactly. So Isaiah confronts him and tells him to trust Yahweh instead, offering a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Immanuel.
Immanuel meaning God with us.
Right. In its immediate historical context, it was a sign to Ahaz that within a few years, the time it takes for a child to be born and learn to choose good over evil, the immediate political threat would be neutralized.
God was present with Judah in their crisis.
But the language Isaiah uses overflows that immediate historical container. It points to an ultimate miraculous fulfillment.
And the Gospel of Matthew explicitly seizes upon this overflowing language. In the very first chapter of the New Testament, Matthew quotes Isaiah 7.14 to explain the virgin birth of Jesus, declaring that Jesus is the literal incarnation of God with us.
Right.
Okay, so that's the first pillar, divine presence. What is the second?
The second pillar is found just 2 chapters later in Isaiah 9.6. This is the royal Davidic pillar, and the text is familiar to anyone who has ever attended a Christmas Eve service.
Oh, yeah. For to us, a child is born.
To us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace.
It's a breathtaking escalation. It starts with a human child being born, but the titles ascribed to this child shatter normal human categories.
You can't just call a regular Judean king Mighty God or Everlasting Father.
Right. Isaiah is envisioning an ideal divine child king who will sit on the throne of David and establish endless peace and justice.
He is marrying the concept of the Davidic monarch with explicit attributes of deity.
Okay, and then the third pillar, found in Isaiah 11, connects back to that arboreal imagery, the stump we just discussed. There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots shall bear fruit.
Right. Jesse was the father of King David. So Isaiah is acknowledging that the royal dynasty is going to be chopped down, the monarchy will fail.
But from that seemingly dead root system, a new branch will emerge.
And this branch is described as uniquely and perfectly endowed with the Spirit of God. He won't judge by what his eyes see or decide disputes by what his ears hear, meaning he won't be susceptible to the corruption, bribes, and shallow judgments of the kings Isaiah was currently dealing with.
He will reign in perfect righteousness.
Right, initiating a new creation where the wolf dwells with the lamb.
Okay, let's pause and look at what Isaiah has constructed so far. We have a miraculously born child who represents God with us.
Sure.
We have an ideal divine king called the Mighty God, and we have a spirit-anointed branch bringing perfect cosmic justice. If you are a first-century Judean living under Roman occupation reading these scrolls, this sounds exactly like the conquering militant hero you are praying for to overthrow the Romans.
It's the perfect warrior king.
But then Isaiah introduces the fourth pillar, and it completely subverts all expectations. We hit Isaiah 53, the suffering servant.
Isaiah 53 is arguably the most theologically dense, profoundly moving, and controversial chapter in the entire Old Testament regarding the messianic figure.
How so?
After building up this image of a glorious conquering king, Isaiah introduces a figure who has no form or majesty, who is despised, rejected, and familiar with suffering.
The text says, "He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief." How does this fit into the architecture of a glorious king?
It introduces the necessary mechanism of substitutionary atonement.
Okay, break that down.
Remember the cosmic courtroom in chapters 1 through 5? It demanded perfect justice. The metallurgical fire demanded absolute purity. But even the surviving remnant of Israel wasn't perfectly sinless.
Right, they were still human.
Exactly. Someone had to absorb the righteous judgment of the Holy One of Israel. Isaiah 53 says of the servant, "He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed."
The servant offers his own life as a guilt offering for the sins of the people.
Right.
But the briefing brings up a really important nuance here regarding the identity of this servant, because earlier in the book, in chapters 41 and 44, God explicitly calls the entire nation of Israel his servant.
He does.
He says, "You, Israel, my servant Jacob, whom I have chosen." So how does the servant transition from being the whole nation to being a single suffering individual in chapter 53?
That is a brilliant piece of literary narrowing.
Yeah.
The role of the servant acts like a funnel throughout the book.
A funnel.
Yes. Originally, the entire nation of Israel was called to be God's servant, to be a light to the nations. But the early chapters proved they failed utterly. They were blind and deaf.
So God sends them into the exile, the refining fire, and they become a suffering servant.
But their suffering wasn't redemptive for the world. It was merely the consequence of their own rebellion.
They suffered for their own sins, not the sins of others.
Exactly. So the identity of the servant continues to narrow. It funnels down from the whole nation to the faithful remnant, and ultimately it focuses on a singular, perfect individual, the Messiah.
Wow.
The New Testament writers look at this text and argue that Jesus steps into the role that the nation failed to fulfill. He becomes the true Israel,
He goes through the ultimate refining fire of judgment on the cross.
suffering not for his own sins, but bearing the iniquities of the world in order to finally bring the light and justice that Israel was originally called to bring.
So Isaiah doesn't just predict a king, he completely redefines the very nature of kingship. He seamlessly marries these two seemingly incompatible concepts, the conquering, glorious divine monarch of chapter 9 and the brutally suffering, rejected, substitutionary servant of chapter 53.
And that profound paradox is exactly why the early Christians returned to Isaiah constantly. When the apostles were trying to explain the crucifixion to a first-century audience, they faced a massive theological hurdle.
The scandal of the cross.
Exactly. How could the promised Messiah be executed like a common criminal by the Romans? It seemed like a total defeat.
Right, because if you only read the conquering king prophecies, a crucified Messiah is an oxymoron. It means he failed.
But because they had the source code of Isaiah, they could point to chapter 53 and say, no, the crucifixion wasn't an accident or a failure, it was the script.
The servant had to be crushed for our iniquities to achieve the final exodus from sin.
Without Isaiah's highly developed theological vocabulary, the gospel writers would have really struggled to articulate the mechanics of the atonement.
You see this vocabulary saturated throughout the New Testament. When John the Baptist steps onto the scene to announce Jesus, he doesn't use his own words. He identifies himself by quoting Isaiah 40. "I am the voice of one crying in the wilderness."
And Jesus himself actively utilizes Isaiah to define his mission.
Right, in Nazareth.
Yeah, when he preaches his first major sermon in the synagogue in Nazareth, he unrolls the scroll of Isaiah, specifically chapter 61, reads the passage about the Spirit of the Lord, anointing him to bring good news to the poor and liberty to the captives.
And then he sits down and declares, "Today, this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing."
And later, the Apostle Paul relies heavily on Isaiah to explain one of the biggest mysteries of the early church, why the Gentiles were being included in the covenant and why a remnant of Israel was being saved.
The architecture of Christian theology is built on the foundation of this ancient scroll. It is truly breathtaking to step back and look at the sheer scale of it all.
It is a sweeping, majestic arc, We move from a cosmic courtroom demanding justice through the terrifying geopolitical fires of empires down to a single dead stump and finally to a miraculous shoot that brings salvation to the ends of the earth.
We really need to land the plane here. We've traversed an incredible amount of territory today.
We covered a lot of ground.
We started in a cave in 1947, traveled back to the 8th century BC to meet an aristocratic prophet, watched him deconstruct the religious hypocrisy of his day, and explored the massive academic debates surrounding predictive prophecy.
We saw Yahweh wield the Assyrian war machine like a stick.
And we examined how a metallurgical fire preserved a holy seed that eventually became the foundational text for understanding the life and death of Jesus of Nazareth.
It is a text that challenges everything about how we view history, suffering, and the sovereignty of God.
And as we close, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought drawn straight from the life of the prophet himself. Because we've spent an hour talking about words, poetry, and textual transmission.
Right.
But for Isaiah ben Amoz, prophecy wasn't just something he spoke or wrote down on a scroll. It was something he physically lived out in his own household. The text tells us that Isaiah's own sons were given highly specific, highly symbolic names by God.
Yes. His first son was named Shir-Jashub, which we discussed earlier.
It means a remnant will return.
Right. So every time Isaiah called his boy's name, he was declaring a message of future hope, grace, and divine mercy to anyone within earshot.
But later, he has another son, and God gives him a name that is quite literally a mouthful. He tells Isaiah to name the boy Maher-Shalal-Hash-Baz,
which is an incredibly heavy burden to place on a toddler.
to say the least.
Yeah.
Translated, it means quick to the plunder, haste to the spoil.
It was a terrifying phrase. That child was a walking, breathing billboard, signaling the absolute certainty of coming judgment and the imminent destruction by the Assyrian army.
These boys were literal, walking portents to the nation of Judah. They were living sermons. Isaiah's family was a physical embodiment of the theological tension between devastating judgment and miraculous hope. And that invites a profound question for us to consider today as we log off. Think about that majestic ancient scroll. It isn't just an artifact to be analyzed. Within its own framework, it acts as a mirror. If our lives, our actions, our priorities, and even the things we build or the causes we elevate are portents or signals to the culture around us, what message are you actively walking out into the world?
That's a challenging thought.
When people look at the trajectory of your life, are you signaling Maher-Shalal-Hash-Baz? Are you projecting cynicism, impending doom, and despair in a chaotic world? Or are you pointing toward the reality of the holy stump? Are you signaling Immanuel, the quiet, enduring reality that even in the midst of historical crises and refining fires, God is with us?
That is the enduring challenge of the text. To live with the absolute conviction of the remnant, trusting the Holy One of Israel in the face of insurmountable empires.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the book of Isaiah. Keep asking hard questions, keep exploring the roots of these ancient texts, and we will see you next time.